We need to address something that is being actively ignored. There is a deafening silence in the mainstream media, a deliberate silence on the biggest economic story of our time. The economist Richard Wolff has been pointing to this, but his voice is conveniently muffled, treated as background noise, as if he were an alarmist. But why do they ignore him? Why does the establishment, whether Democrat or Republican, refuse to debate the substance of what he says? The answer is simple, and for them, terrifying. It's because he is right. What they don't want you to know is that the American debt is not a problem for 2050. It isn't a time bomb our grandchildren will have to defuse. The bomb has already exploded. The collapse isn't coming. It has already begun. We are living amidst the wreckage, but the smoke from media propaganda is so thick that we are instructed not to believe what our own eyes and our own wallets are telling us. Let me say something that no one in Washington, or on the editorial boards of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, dares to admit aloud: the financial model that sustained the American empire for 80 years is dead. What we are witnessing is not just a fiscal crisis. It is the terminal symptom. It is the high fever of an empire in deep, profound psychological denial. The American empire, accustomed to dictating the rules of the game, to writing the checks and expecting the rest of the world to accept them as payment, now finds itself unable to pay its own bills without running the printing presses at full speed. They are in denial about the fact that their old tools, military power, sanctions, and above all, the sacred power of the dollar, have stopped working. Worse than that, these tools are now backfiring. Every sanction they apply is a nail in the dollar's coffin. Every trillion they print to finance their proxy wars is another shovel of dirt on the credibility of their treasury bonds. They are amputating the arm that feeds them, in a desperate act to maintain an illusion of control. While Washington drowns in IOUs that nobody else wants to buy, a new multipolar world, led by the BRICS and sovereign nations that refuse to be vassals, is quietly, methodically, building an alternative system. A system based on real commodities, on real trade, on mutual respect. A system that does not need the dollar. A system that renders the United States, and its mountain of unpayable debt, functionally irrelevant. The denial in Washington is so deep that they look at this new architecture and call it a threat, when, in fact, it is merely a consequence of their own actions. Let us look at the evidence. Let's look at the facts the media refuses to connect. The first proof, the epicenter of the collapse, the debt itself. The numbers are so astronomical they become meaningless to the average citizen, and that is exactly how they like it. They talk about $35 trillion. But every 100 days, they add another trillion. Think about that. $1 trillion in 100 days. Russia's entire annual military budget is a fraction of that. The cost of all of China's infrastructure is a fraction of that. The United States is adding this amount to its debt in just over 3 months, merely to keep the lights on. But the real number, as Richard Wolff correctly points out, is much, much higher. The unfunded liabilities, the promises the government has made in Social Security, Medicare, pensions, exceed $200 trillion. It is a fiscal black hole from which there is no return. And what does the media say about this? Oh, but we owe it to ourselves. The government can always print money. That is the central lie. When the government prints money, it is not creating wealth. It is stealing wealth from those who hold it. It is diluting the purchasing power of every dollar in your bank account. This is called inflation. Inflation is not an accident. It is not the result of Putin's greed or supply chain problems. Inflation is a deliberate policy. It is a hidden tax. It is how the empire, in its denial phase, finances its deficit. They can no longer raise taxes on the rich, because the rich own them. They cannot cut military spending, because the military-industrial complex is the heart of the empire. So, what do? They print the money. And who pays the bill for this printing? We do. The people. You. The worker, the retiree, the young person trying to save. Every time you go to the supermarket and see higher prices, you are paying for the collapse of American debt. You are subsidizing the wars in Ukraine and Taiwan. You are paying interest to the bankers who own the treasury bonds. Richard Wolff calls this what it is, the greatest transfer of wealth from the working class to the financial elite in human history. It is the expropriation of the middle class in real time, and the media calls it economic growth. But the scheme is beginning to fail. The collapse is manifesting in a way that is even more dangerous for the empire, the cost of servicing the debt. For the first time in history, the interest payments on the U.S. national debt have surpassed its defense budget. Let me repeat that. The United States is spending more money just to pay the interest on its past debts than to fund its entire global military. This is what financiers call a death spiral. It is a vicious cycle. To pay the interest, they must issue more debt. But to convince people to buy this new debt, they must offer higher interest rates. And higher interest rates mean the next interest payment will be even larger. It is a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme that has hit its mathematical wall. And here is the real reason for the media's silence. Who used to buy this debt? Who financed the American deficit? The rest of the world. China, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Europe. They bought U.S. Treasury bonds because it was the world's insurance policy, the risk-free asset. But then, the empire, in its arrogance and desperation, decided to weaponize the dollar. They froze Russia's reserves. $300 billion, stolen overnight. They thought this would bring Russia to its knees. They thought it was a demonstration of power. It was the single greatest strategic miscalculation in modern history. What Washington really did was send a message to the rest of the world: your money is not safe with us. If you disobey us, we will steal it. And the world listened. Immediately, China began to sell its treasury bonds. Japan began to sell. Saudi Arabia, which for 50 years upheld the petrodollar, is now selling oil in yuan, in rupees, in reis. The dollarization is no longer a conspiracy theory. It is geopolitical reality. So, if China isn't buying the debt, if Russia isn't buying, if the Saudis aren't buying, who is buying the trillions in new debt the US needs to issue every month? The answer is terrifying: no one. Or rather, the Federal Reserve itself. The central bank is buying the government's debt. This is the government essentially paying itself with money it just created from nothing. It is the direct monetization of debt. It is what the Weimar Republic did. It is what Zimbabwe did. It is the final stage before hyperinflation and the total collapse of the currency. They are trapped. The empire is in a trap of its own making. If they raise interest rates to fight the inflation they created, they bankrupt their own government, as they cannot afford the interest payments on the debt. They also bankrupt the entire banking system, which is sitting on trillions of dollars of devaluing treasury bonds. But if they cut interest rates and return to massive printing, they ignite the fire of hyperinflation and destroy the dollar once and for all. There is no way out. There are no easy solutions. There is no soft landing. The plane has already crashed. They are just trying to convince us that the turbulence is temporary. And the solution the political class offers? The solution that both Joe Biden and Donald Trump agree on? Tariffs. They look at this structural inferno and decide the solution is to throw more gasoline on it. They tell the American people that the blame for their problems lies with China or with Mexico. They say, let's impose 60% tariffs, as Trump shouts at his rallies. And the crowd cheers, because they have been trained to blame the foreigner, not the system that is exploiting them. But what is a tariff? As we have explained here on the Critical Compass, a tariff is not paid by China. A tariff is a tax paid by the American importer, which is passed directly on to you, the consumer. Tariffs are inflationary. They raise the cost of everything, from electronics to construction materials. By imposing tariffs, they are not saving American industry. They are making American industry less competitive. They are isolating themselves from the global market, precisely at the moment when the global market, led by the BRICS, is growing faster than the West. It is economic suicide, wrapped in a flag of patriotism. It is denial in its purest form, blaming the outside world for your internal failures, while doubling down on the policies that caused the failure in the first place. And now, let us look at the other side of the scale. The absolute contrast to this policy of financial suicide and denial. While the United States, in desperation, tries to build tariff walls to protect itself from the world they created, the multipolar world is building bridges. Literally. This is Exhibit B, the rise of the real world, the economy of production, led by the BRICS. What China, Russia, India, Brazil, and the new sovereign nations have understood is that real wealth does not come from printing money. Real wealth does not come from Wall Street financialization schemes. Real wealth comes from industry, infrastructure, energy, technology, and feeding your people. What have the United States and the G7 become? They are a casino economy. A service economy, which in reality means moving debt from one spreadsheet to another, while nothing tangible is produced. The Rust Belt is living proof of this. They took their industrial heartland and exported it to China and Mexico in pursuit of short-term profits, and now they complain that China and Mexico are strong. It is the height of irony. Meanwhile, what did China do? It built the Belt and Road Initiative. The Western media, in its propaganda role, calls this a debt trap. This is psychological projection. They accuse China of doing what they themselves have done for a century with the IMF and the World Bank. The IMF would arrive in a country and say, "We will give you a loan, but you must privatize your water, your electricity, your ports. You must surrender." China arrives and says, "We will build a high-speed rail for you. We will build a port. We will build a hydroelectric plant. And we will trade." It is a development model versus an extraction model. And it is working. Look at the statistics they hate for you to see. The combined GDP of the BRICS countries, measured in purchasing power parity, is already larger than that of the G7. This is not a projection for 2030. It is a fact as of 2024. The G7, the club of old colonial empires, is now the economic minority. The engine of global growth is no longer in Washington, London, or Berlin. It is in Beijing, in New Delhi, in Sao Paulo. And this brings us back to the collapse of American debt. The multipolar world is not just winning in industry, it is actively abandoning the US debt system. The dollarization is the world's strategic response to Washington's abuse of the dollar weapon. When the US stole Russia's foreign reserves, it was a shot that echoed in every central bank on the planet. Every country realized, if my dollars can be frozen at any moment by a political decision in Washington, then my dollars are not really mine. And the stampede began. China is selling US treasuries at a record pace, month after month. And with the dollars it receives, what does it buy? Gold. It stockpiles gold. It buys real commodities. Russia and China conduct 90% of their bilateral trade in yuan and rubles. The dollar has been completely eliminated from the equation. India buys Russian oil in rupees. The UAE, once the heart of the petrodollar, is now selling oil to China in yuan. Brazil and China have a currency swap agreement that bypasses the dollar entirely. The new system is being built. The mBridge project, a central bank digital currency platform between China, Thailand, Hong Kong, and the UAE, has just completed its first pilot. It is a cross-border payment system that does not go through New York, does not use SWIFT, and cannot be sanctioned by a bureaucrat in Washington. Meanwhile, the greatest US financial innovation in recent years has been, what? Fraudulent cryptocurrencies and a stock market propped up by debt-financed stock buybacks. It is the virtual economy versus the real economy. And the real economy always wins in the end. Look at the example of Mexico. For decades, Mexico was the laboratory for Washington's neoliberalism. The Washington Consensus demanded total privatization. They were forced to sell their assets. The result was stagnation and inequality. Then, a sovereign leader, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, took power. And what did he do? The exact opposite of what Washington ordered. He reversed the privatization. He strengthened the state-owned companies, Pemex, oil, and CFE, electricity. He invested in the people, raised the minimum wage. The neoliberal media screamed that it would be the end of Mexico. And what happened? The Mexican economy is growing stronger than the American one. The Mexican peso has become one of the strongest currencies in the world, the super peso. AMLO proved that the neoliberal model was wrong. He proved that economic sovereignty works. And that, to Washington, is an unforgivable sin. And what about technology? China. The US, in its denial, accuses China of stealing intellectual property. It's an excuse they've used for 20 years. The truth is that China invested in research and development, while the US invested in wars and Wall Street. The result? BYD, a Chinese company, has surpassed Tesla as the world's largest electric vehicle manufacturer. Chinese EVs are more advanced and cheaper. What is the empire in denial's response? Tariffs. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, in a rare moment of bipartisan agreement, concur that the solution is to ban Chinese cars with 100% tariffs. This is not a policy of confidence. This is a policy of fear. It is an admission of defeat. It is telling the world, we can no longer compete. Our only solution is to build a wall. But that wall only isolates American consumers from better, cheaper products, while the rest of the world, Asia, Africa, Latin America, embraces the new technology. And this brings us to Act 4. The ultimate symbol of denial. This is where we must understand the figure of Donald Trump. And to be fair, Joe Biden is just the other side of the same imperial coin. Both are servants of the debt system. But Trump is the personification, the clearest symptom of the empire's psychological state. Trump is a master of theatrics. He is the product of an empire that no longer has substance, only spectacle. He sees the structural collapse, the debt collapse that Richard Wolff describes, and what does he offer? He does not offer a solution to the debt system. How could he? He himself is the king of debt. His businesses were built on leverage and bankruptcy. He does not offer a plan to rebuild the Rust Belt. Instead, he offers scapegoats. Trump's rhetoric is a mass distraction. He tells the American people, whose middle class has been decimated by debt-fueled inflation, that the problem isn't the Federal Reserve. The problem isn't Wall Street. The problem isn't the corporations that exported their jobs. No. The problem, according to him, is immigrants. The problem is China. The problem is a vague, deep state. He presents himself as an outsider, but his main legislative achievement was a massive tax cut for corporations and billionaires, a tax cut that, of course, was not paid for. It just added trillions more to the national debt that is now imploding. He criticizes the Federal Reserve, but only when they raise interest rates. When he was in power, he demanded they print more money to inflate the stock market bubble. Trump is denial in human form. He is the charlatan doctor selling snake oil to a terminal patient. He promises to make America great again, but his policies, tariffs, isolationism, more debt, are precisely the policies that accelerate the decline. Richard Wolff's analysis is, at its core, a Marxist analysis. It is about class struggle. It is about how the capitalist system, in its final, financial capitalism, phase, must exploit the working class to survive. It needs inflation. It needs you to pay the bill for the elite's debt. Trump and Biden are the two managers of this system. They give us a theatrical choice. Do you want the polite manager who reads the teleprompter, Biden, Or do you want the chaotic manager who yells at rallies, Trump? But in either case, the order of the day is the same: save the banks, save the bondholders, save the empire, and send the bill to the people. They make us fight over cultural issues, over bathrooms, over pronouns, over walls, while they, the financial elites who own both parties, laugh all the way to the bank, financed by your labor and the destruction of your purchasing power. So, here we are. The media's silence on the debt, on Richard Wolff's analysis, is not an accident. It is a propagandistic necessity. They cannot admit that the collapse isn't coming, but that it has already happened. They cannot admit that the $35 trillion debt is unpayable, and that the $200 trillion in unfunded promises is a fantasy. They cannot admit that the inflation destroying your family is not Putin's fault, but rather the deliberate policy of your own central bank to monetize this debt and pay interest to billionaires. They cannot admit that the rest of the world, led by the BRICS, is no longer afraid, is no longer playing their game, and is building an alternative system. The American empire is in denial. Its elites, whether symbolized by Biden or by Trump, are trapped in their own illusion of power. But the math is relentless. Reality is stubborn. The world has changed. The collapse of the debt system is the defining event of our time, and the media is silent because its job is to keep you calm while the shit sinks. But you, who have watched this video to the end, you are no longer calm. You are aware. You see the structure behind the smoke and mirrors. If this analysis has made you see the world with new eyes, if you understand that there is a fight for dignity happening, then do not remain silent. Share this video so that more people can understand what the mainstream media will never explain.